We will peep two videos on the Breaking Points channel. The first video is titled Dave Smith Flames Ben Shapiro for Israel Wokeness. Dave Smith flames Ben Shapiro for Israel Wokeness. And the other video is titled American Podcaster Beaten, Arrested in Israel. We will get to the American Podcaster video, but first we will peep the Dave Smith video. But first we will peep the Dave Smith video. Let's see what Crystal Ball, the leftist host of Breaking Points and the host who speaks from a lefty's POV, and the libertarian comedian and podcaster with the channel name, with the podcast name Parts of the Problem, Dave Smith have to say. Let's see what they both have to say. Play.
Let's go ahead and get to this woke right situation. I want to set this up with some news with regards. Let's go ahead and get to this woke right situation. I want to set this up with some news with regard to Project Esther, it's called, which is this plan that was. Let's go ahead and get to this woke right situation. I want to set this up with some news with regard to Project Esther, it's called, which is this plan that was hatched by the Heritage Foundation, which has really been implemented almost completely by the Trump administration to silence any sort of dissent from the Israel consensus. And we can put this article up from the New York Times. I mean, this is, again, the mainstream press reporting on something that both Dropsite News and Mateo reported on, I think, quite a while ago, maybe a year ago. But they have some interesting details here. The headline is, the group behind Project 2025 has a plan to crush the pro-Palestinian movement. Project Esther outlined an ambitious plan to fight anti-Semitism by branding
what they
a broad
perceive
range
to
of
be
critics of Israel, like the media, as effectively a terrorist support. Project's plan to fight anti-Semitism by branding a broad range of critics of Israel, like you and me, Dave, as effectively a terrorist support network.
Candace Owens, me, Anomaly, different people.
The plan to crush the pro-Palestinian movement.
People who have legit criticisms of the Israeli government. They label us anti-Semitic.
Sort of dissent from the Israel consensus. And we can put this article up for the new. Been implemented almost completely by the
they label
to silence any
the Candaces lunatics,
from the Israel
traitors, different vituperative labels. It is crazy.
Both Dropsite News and Mateo reported on, I think, quite a while ago, maybe a year ago. But they have some interesting
nuts.
This woke right situation. I want to set this up with some news with regard to Project Esther, it's called, which is this plan that was hatched by the Heritage Foundation, which has really been implemented almost completely by the Trump administration to silence any sort of dissent from the Israel consensus.
They use the label anti-Semitic as a cudgel to muzzle people who tell the truth or say logical-ish. It is nuts.
Go ahead and get to this.
It is nuts, yo.
I want to set this up with some news with regard to Project Esther, it's called, which is this plan that was hatched by the Heritage Foundation, which has really been implemented almost completely by the Trump administration to silence any sort of dissent from the Israel consensus. And we can put this article up from the New York Times. I mean, this is, again, the mainstream press reporting on something that both Dropsite News and Mateo reported on, I think, quite a while ago, maybe a year ago. But they have some interesting details here. The headline is, the group behind Project 2025 has a plan to crush the pro-Palestinian movement. Project Esther outlined an ambitious plan to fight anti-Semitism by branding a broad range of critics of Israel, like you and me, Dave, as effectively a terrorist support network so that they could be deported, defunded, sued, fired, expelled, ostracized, and otherwise excluded from what it considered open society. Project Esther's architects envisioned outcomes that at the time might seem far-fetched, curriculum employed to be sympathetic,
fragility,
Hamas support narrative with
fragileness,
Israel,
weakness,
as effectively a
Patheticness.
terrorist support network. So
All
that they
these
could be
labels.
deported, defunded, sued, fired, expelled,
Befits.
ostracized, and otherwise excluded
All of
from
these
what is
labels
considered open
befit.
society. Project Esther's architects envisioned outcomes that at the time might have seemed far-fetched. Curriculum, if believed to be sympathetic to a Hamas support narrative, would be taken out of schools and universities as effectively a terrorist support network so that they could be deported, defunded, sued, fired, expelled, ostracized, and otherwise excluded from what it considered open society. Project Esther's architects envisioned outcomes that at the time might have seemed far-fetched. Curriculum, if believed to be sympathetic to a Hamas support narrative, would be taken out of schools and universities. Supporting faculty would be removed. Social media would be purged of content deemed to be anti-Semitic. Institutions would lose public funding. Foreign students who push for Palestinian rights would have their visas revoked or deported. And they said once a sympathetic presidential administration was in place, according to the plan, we will organize rapidly, take immediate action to stop the bleeding, and achieve all objectives within 2 years. Now, 4 months after Mr. Trump took office, Heritage Foundation leaders are taking an early victory lap. So when I look at these extraordinary efforts, which have a clear identitarian lens and are using authoritarian tactics
Dictatorial.
to enforce that identitarian worldview, to me that is the complete definition of woke.
Wokeness.
Now, woke at this point may be one of these terms.
It is wokeness. It is the truth. It is what it is. No air quotes. It is really woke. Woke is not limited to one group, race, religion. If you are fragile, if you use labels to control if you use labels as cudgels or weapons to muzzle people with dissenting views or people who tell the truth, you are woke in reality, bro. It is what it is. You can be a woke leftist, a woke rightist, a woke Caucasian person, a woke black person, a woke Arab person, a woke Asian person, a woke Christian, a woke Muslim, a woke Jew, a woke Buddhist. It doesn't matter, bro. If you are fragile, if you equate everything to hatred, bigotry, odium, hate, detestation, aversion, you are woke. It is what it is, man. Yo. Meant to say it is what it is, man. Facts. Big facts, yo.
Have a clear identitarian lens and are using authoritarian tactics to enforce that identitarian worldview.
Agreed.
To me, that is the complete definition of woke. Now, woke at this point may be one of these terms that just needs to be retired because it's just sort of an all-encompassing smear and people mean different things with it and it's become sort of like content-free. But to me, using authoritarian tactics to enforce an identitarian worldview is the definition of woke. And so to me, when I look at this is the woke right, and not that it's all the right, because it's the Trump administration.
A certain section,
are on board with this.
A certain branch, a certain subcategory of the right is woke. A certain subcategory of the right is woke. Just like a certain subcategory of the left is woke. The whole left isn't woke, but a certain subcategory is woke. A certain subcategory of the right is woke. Equally woke.
And it's become sort of like content-free.
Equally woke. It is what it is.
Authoritarian tactics to enforce an identitarian worldview is the definition of woke. And so to me, when I look at this is the woke right, and not that it's all the right, because it's the Trump administration. Many right-wingers are on board with this. And so when I started seeing this term woke right thrown around, I just assumed that was what people meant, because that's really logical to me. Even some of the same language about like safe spaces and, we have a clip we could play, but we'll just reference it, of a rabbi in a hearing who was like, it's not enough to be anti-Semitic, you have to be anti-Semitic. And I'm like, oh my God.
They sound just like the radical far left people in the black community, bro. Bro. The dudes who uttered those words sounds just like the radical blacks on the left, bro. It is the same ish. It is the same ish, yo. It really, yo. It truly is the same. It truly is the same ish, yo.
Flavor was this reference it of a rabbi in a hearing who was like, it's not enough to be anti-Semitic, you have to be anti-Semitic. And I'm like, oh my God, it was, the very same thing that we saw on the left previously.
Weak.
So when I was informed that, this term woke right is being used somehow against people like you who are dissenters from the Israel consensus,
Anomaly.
This term woke right is being used somehow against people like you who are dissenters from the Israel consensus.
Thomas Massey.
I've had a very hard time wrapping my head around it, so I wanted you to help me understand the contours of this fight that is going on here on the right.
So I initially started using the term in exactly the same way that you mean it. And one of the things that's amazing, and it really is just the hypocrisy, is all over the place. And so, here you have the Heritage Foundation demonizing the people like me who might go, hey, we spent $8 trillion on the war on terrorism. Hey, Heritage Foundation, do you see an issue with that when we're $36 trillion in
debt? Okay. Or 37, 38, almost 40. Almost 40. Certain people say 37 trillion. Not sure which, don't remember which one, but it is close to 40 trillion in debt for sure. Bro, that is crazy, yo. It really is crazy. That is all the way crazy, yo.
Started using the term exactly the same way that you mean it. And one of the things that's amazing, and really is just the hypocrisy, is all over the place. And so, here you have the Heritage Foundation demonizing the people like me who might go, hey, we spent $8 trillion on the war on terrorism. Hey, Heritage Foundation, do you see an issue with that when we're $36 trillion in debt? Okay, well, here's the biggest part of it. You could argue that entitlements drive it the most, but however you feel about entitlement programs, they are something that people have paid into and are now receiving. Starting catastrophic wars that you don't need to fight at all is just a pure waste of money. And it does come with this other little nasty side effect of murdering children, which we should probably not do.
Innocent people, elderly, crippled women.
Well, isn't there something?
Everybody should be opposed. Every person with a soul should be opposed to the killing, the mass murder, the mass carnage of innocent people, bro. It is basic, simple math, yo. It is basic. It is basic, yo. Be rooted in reality, please.
Just a pure waste of money, and it does come with this other little nasty side effect of murdering children, which, we should probably not do.
Controversial to say, apparently, but, I am opposed to that personally.
Well, isn't there something to this, Crystal? Because I always thought, for many years, the left-leaning people would, as a retort to, the pro-life position, they would say, well, don't you oppose the death penalty? And I always thought that was not a good argument. And conservatives would rightly come back and say, yeah, but that person's been convicted of a crime. We all accept that you lose some rights when you've committed a heinous, violent crime.
Yes.
But by the way, I oppose the death penalty for other reasons. But, but this is such a good response. How do you claim to be the pro-life party? And you are unaffected by the fact that there are children dying? I'm sorry.
Contradictory.
The same people who are pro-life advocates will say, well, what's your plan for eliminating Hamas? And it's wait, so now I have to have a plan? I can't just be opposed to the intentional killing of babies? Anyway, but look, as I was saying the other day with Tucker, we have Ben Shapiro who made his career opposing identity politics as a proud Zionist. You have people like Ron DeSantis, who made his name as being the anti-woke guy. But then as soon as the question of Israel comes up, it's like, oh my God, these college kids and their hurt feelings. And so all of it is just
Goofy.
And look, the most basic one to me is the shutting down of legitimate
criticism.
With
Yes.
accusations of bigotry,
Yep.
which really was the calling card of the woke. That's
The far
what most
left.
people mean when they say the word. And you have examples like Thomas Massey made the argument. Now, feel however you feel about this, I agree.
He's
with that.
balanced.
It's certainly a
Massey.
legitimate
He's
argument.
dope.
When he voted no for the Israel funding, he was like, "Look, we're $36 trillion in debt.
National
we
debt.
can't afford to fund other
Logical,
countries' wars."
based.
That's it.
He
And
gets
he's
savaged,
consistent on this. He votes against all these
slanged,
spending bills.
aspersed.
And then,
Crazy.
John Podhoretz from Commentary Magazine,
That guy's
in response to this, called him anti-Semitic filth. That's
Wow.
There's something similar about me, by the way. But yeah.
DevoTubePublisher
Yeah.
is
And he
crazy.
said some things about me as well. I mean,
The vilification.
and then,
The venom. Doing the V words. The alliteration.
Anti-Semitic filth.
Crazy. Crazy.
Commentary Magazine,
Crazy.
in response to this, called him anti-Semitic filth.
Nuts.
We're $36 trillion in debt, and we can't afford to fund other countries' wars. That's it. And he's consistent on this. He votes against all these spending bills. And then John Podhoretz from Commentary Magazine,
John, bro.
in response to this,
John, you
called
suck.
him anti-Semitic.
You suck, John. F you.
He said something similar about me, by the way. But yeah. That's his
I'm
demo.
sure.
Yeah.
And he said some things about me as well. I mean, the guy is just, by the way, his father at least wrote some interesting books. He's just totally unimpressive. But anyway, so you have in this moment when the supporters of Israel's destruction of Gaza they are supporting the war on identitarian grounds, claiming eternal victim status for one identitarian group. They are shutting down dissent with accusations of bigotry and
Bad
speech
faith
laws, and ranging from as the stuff that you guys have covered on the show so much. And then they're also calling the other side woke.
Crazy.
For,
Rich.
opposing these
It
wars.
is rich.
The
Coming
ones that come
from
up
these full pro-free speech riotous, bro. It is very rich and contradictory coming from the faux F-A-U-X pro-free speech riotous, bro. Yeah. Sickening, disgusting, detestable, odious. Odious, bro. All the way odious. Odious. Crappy. Garbage. All the way. Cease this BS, yo, please. But y'all won't, because y'all are goofies, bro.
They are supporting the war on identitarian grounds, claiming eternal victim status for one identitarian group. They are shutting down dissent with accusations of bigotry and supporting speech laws, and ranging from as the stuff that you guys have covered on the show so much. And then they're also calling the other side woke for opposing these wars. And the ones who have come up with the flimsiest of justifications. Essentially they are forced to just view our arguments through like a critical theory lens and say, oh, well, you're saying that you woke up to the reality that Israel has too much influence on our government, as if now waking up to anything makes you woke. Like, it's just the most ridiculous,
Stupid. Fatuous.
It's such a loose definition that it could be applied to anyone.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of meaningless. But I do think that
It is meaningless.
And I'm curious to get your
Completely.
thoughts on this, but I've been saying this definition that
Or
it could be applied to
not
anyone.
not
Yeah.
completely meant to
But I do
say
think that
indubitably
really,
meaningless.
and, I'm curious.
Unquestionably meaningless. Truly, truthfully meaningless.
It's just the most ridiculous, it's such a loose definition that it could be applied to anyone.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of meaningless. But I do think that really, and you know, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, but I've been saying this for years, that I think many of the most popular kind of anti-woke, anti-social justice warrior thinkers,
Yeah.
they all kind of got wokeism wrong all along. And this includes Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro,
Yep.
all
Douglas
of the guys who
Murray.
kind of were famous for battling it out with these college
Michael
students.
Knowles, Andrew Clavin, different people.
Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, all
Dave
of the guys
Rubin.
who kind of were famous for battling it out with these college
Dennis
students.
Prager,
The
Charlie
Ben
Kirk,
Shapiro,
or
all of the guys who kind of were famous for battling it out with these college students. And this also includes people like James Lindsay and Brett Weinstein, I think, even, who I like very much, but I do think kind of a lot of them, they always viewed wokeism as the left taking over the liberals.
Yeah.
And I do understand, like, there is a surface level plausibility to that, to view things like that, because certainly, like, the influences of critical race theory and, you know, even stuff from the Frankfurt School, kind of the cultural
the
Marxism
LGBT
type stuff, the
Q
long march through the
plus mafia.
institutions. These were left-wing ideas, and so when you see every giant corporation and the political establishment regurgitating kind of left-wing talking points, it's easy on the surface to say, oh, well, look, the left took over the liberals, and now they're all a bunch of leftists. But it's really missing the point. And so many of them get lost in focusing on, like, the intellectual history of wokeism and how you can trace it through the universities and what thinkers said what, and, you know, but really, that's not the interesting component to wokeism. The interesting component is what happened right around 2012 when every single giant corporate media apparatus decided they were all going to go all in on this stuff. And it was from the highest levels of power. You know, you can look at those, like, nexus charts where you track the words like racism and you know, toxic masculinity and transgenderism, and they all shoot up. And so the theory that, like, these kids got out of colleges and then got jobs in the corporations, well, then you would expect, like, a slow increase. Like, they didn't take over the New York Times in 1 year. So what's going on here? And then the more you look back at it, you realize, like, okay, why are the CIA and the Federal Reserve pushing these commercials of, like, I'm a Latina with anxiety disorder who's a single mom and I work for the CIA? Like, I don't think a college kid got in and took over the CIA. So what did happen? And what happened was, after Barack Obama won his historic campaign in 2008 on the promise of ending the wars and closing Guantanamo Bay and repealing the George W. Bush era catastrophe, he went the other direction and expanded it. And so for his re-election campaign, he couldn't say, hey, remember how I said I was going to close Guantanamo Bay? It's closed. Remember how I was going to end the wars? Okay, yeah, I expanded them. But I'm for gay marriage.
File claims with a tap. It's about time insurance does that. Get a quote at lemonade.com.
What is Fiverr Go? It's AI. Only you know exactly what you're getting. Search Fiverr Go.
I don't wish to continue this friendship. The funniest thing I've seen in my entire life. I'm really excited about it. I love it.
We are still very early on in what is going to be a very, very long 4 years.
In the wake of the Occupy movement,
Yeah.
they were like, hey, here's a Faustian bargain for the left.
That's it.
Well, listen, we're not going to give you listen, the banker bailouts are going to continue, the banker profits are going to continue, but we will send all of our white executives to diversity training.
Right. That's 100%. And
Crazy.
you know, and my colleague Ryan Graham has really, like, literally written the book on this.
Mm-hmm.
But another seminal moment is when you have Bernie Sanders, who represents, especially in the, 2015, 2016, this much more class-focused and much less
Economic.
focused true like leftist ideology, and he's rising in the polls.
Populism.
And he represents this threat to the entrenched interest in the Democratic Party. And so what Hillary Clinton does, recognizing that this progressive movement is ascendant in the party, she tries to out-left him by saying, if you break up the big banks, that's not going to end racism. That's not going to end sexism. And so she substitutes in these cultural identitarian concerns for the universal class-based concerns that were represented by the Bernie Sanders movement. And by the way, it's kind of effective. That's how you end up with Bernie Bros being touted, they're sexist and they're racist, and he doesn't care about civil rights and all of this stuff.
Smears.
And it works. And then, because
Tarnishing.
it's effective, he and much of the left, I think almost all of the left, frankly, the elected left at least, feel the need to also lean into this language,
Radical
worldview, etc. But it comes from the neoliberal care about civil rights and all of this stuff. And it works. And then, because it's effective, he and much of the left, I think almost all of the left, frankly, the elected left at least, feel the need to also lean into this language and this worldview, etc. But it comes from the neoliberals and the corporate establishment that want to virtue signal and want to block any sort of more extensive or more revolutionary type of reform. And that's where it really originates. So that has been something that has really frustrated me as well. And and you can see it. And one last thing on this, and then I'll get your reaction. But you can see it now with how the corporations on a dime, they flip from their virtue signaling to like, oh, Mark Zuckerberg, I'm going to do content moderation in Austin. I'm going to wear a big chain. I'm going to get into fighting. I'm going to go on with
MMA.
You can see the way that they wore
Mark
this
Mark Zuckerberg.
And that's where it really originates. So that has been something that has really frustrated me as well. And and you can see it. And one last thing on this, and then I'll get your reaction. But you can see it now with how the corporations on a dime, they flip from their virtue signaling to like, oh, Mark Zuckerberg, I'm going to do content moderation in Austin. I'm going to wear a big chain. I'm going to get into fighting. I'm going to go on with Joe Rogan. You can see the way that they wore this as a convenience to meet the moment. And then the vibe shifted. Oh, well, we're done with that. We're going to be over here, hanging out with Trump in his inauguration now.
Yep, he's in power. The right is in power. So
I'm going to wear a big chain. I'm going to get into fighting. I'm going to go on with Joe Rogan. You can see.
Yeah, their decisions were not rooted in principlesness or
we're going to be over here,
genuineness.
Inauguration now. Well, right. As a convenience to meet the moment, and then the minute the vibe,
they made these decisions to appease, to mollify.
To meet the moment, and then the minute the vibe shifted, oh, well, we're done with that. We're going to be over here, hanging out with Trump at his inauguration now.
Well, right. I mean, of course.
Bezos, certain other billionaires.
Convenience to meet the moment, and then the minute the vibe shifted, oh, well, we're done with that. We're going to be over here, hanging.
Yep, hop on this wave.
That has been something that has
the Trump
really
wave
me as well. And
they went from far left to.
And one last thing on this, and then I'll get your reaction. But you can see it now with how the corporations on a dime, they flip from their virtue signaling to like, oh,
censorship.
I'm going to do content moderation in Austin. I'm going to wear a big chain. I'm going to get into fighting. I'm going to go on with Joe Rogan. You can see the way that they wore this as a convenience to meet the moment. And then the minute the vibe shifted, oh, well, we're done with that. We're going to be over here, hanging out with Trump.
Wave hopping.
Now.
Well, right. I mean, of course, right? Like, so these giant, because we live in such a globalized world and these are multinational corporations. So, like, a lot of these corporations are in almost every country.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they're flying the pride flag in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, exactly.
Do they really believe in this stuff? No, they don't. This is pure, and of course, it's
facade,
example,
a front,
Bernie Sanders, of course, those two
a veneer,
girls who went up and took them.
In illusion.
So, like, a lot of these corporations are in almost every country. Mm-hmm. Do you think they're flying the pride flag in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, exactly.
Do they really believe in this stuff? No, they don't. This is pure, and of course, it's such a great example. You said with Bernie Sanders, of course, those two Black Lives Matter girls who went up and took the microphone from him. And then every single time, the accusation from Elizabeth Warren was, oh, he was sexist many years ago. They would always say the Bernie bros are sexist. This was always, so like, essentially, what it really was a neoliberal takeover of the left using some leftist rhetoric. And so the focus, because if you just think about it, right, the focus in the first, let's say, 10 years of the 21st century from the left, like, what were they protesting? Well, they were protesting the war in Iraq, they were protesting the Patriot Act, and they were protesting the Banker bailouts. I mean, they had their eye on the prize. And like, I'm not a leftist, I probably wouldn't agree with a lot of their solutions. Well, I would with the war in Iraq, but I probably wouldn't agree with necessarily their solutions for the economic stuff. But at least they were focused on power. They were focused on the people who were actually screwing over the American people. And so, of course, what do you want to do? Get them distracted. The powerful love a distraction, especially a distraction that pits the people against each other.
Divide
and conquer.
Disunites.
The oldest propaganda that you can find. And and I'll just say this, because I think it's particularly said to you, that the intellectual kind of background of the woke stuff, which I've just, I've read some of it, it's a waste of time. Like, look, that isn't leftism. That was one sliver of leftism. It was one school of thought on the left, and it is by far the worst. And if you really want to see somebody like tear apart the postmodernists, listen to Noam Chomsky do it. Nobody on the right has ever torn them apart better than that guy did. He just absolutely destroyed their entire worldview. And, there are great schools of thought on the left. I mean, like Noam Chomsky is required reading if you want to be like an educated person. You have to read this stuff. And I'm not an anarcho-syndicalist. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's a brilliant mind, and he's got like a real solid worldview and a way of looking at things that you can benefit from, even if you don't agree with them. This other stuff, the postmodernists, it's just garbage. It's nonsense. And so it's not as if, like, it was the worst school of leftism that they took. And again, I think that there is something about, and I know this, like, obviously I'm known for being a libertarian, but I'm a Jewish kid who grew up with a single mom in Brooklyn, New York. Like, I understand the kind of liberal left worldview. That's what I'm from. Those people are my people. And there is something where it was like, they find a way to play on your weaknesses in the same way they did to right-wingers after 9/11, where it's like, are you a wimp or are you a big tough guy who wants to go fight a war and protect your country? That was just like kryptonite to right-wingers. You couldn't fight that. You were like an evil person if you didn't believe. And the same thing with leftists with racism. And for leftists, it's like their Achilles heel. And I think they're kind of growing out of this now after the last few years it was so abused. But understandably, given our nation's history and the history of humanity, if you care about egalitarianism and you care about abuse of power, well, what's always the worst version of that has always been how racial minorities are treated, and not just in our society, but particularly in our society. And so to be accused of being racist was always the thing that would make liberals and leftists go like, oh, no, not me. I'm the opposite of that. That's what it's their whole identity. And so once you weaponize that, and you can see it even with Bernie Sanders, how weak he was. Those two girls were so obnoxious and came up and stole his microphone in the middle of his rally where 10,000 people were there to see him. And he went, okay, go ahead.
And here's a guy who, was genuinely, like, involved getting arrested in the civil rights movement and has a spotless record they can put up against anyone when it comes to, racism, sexism, whatever you want to say. One last thing before we move on, because I want to get your reaction to these Tim Dillon clips, but on the woke right piece, it seems like a lot of what they're doing, too, is guilt by association.
Yes.
Because you do genuinely have, like, overt anti-Semites who are using the issue of Israel-Palestine to ascend, and they end up, backing some of the things that we back, but it does genuinely come out on anti-Semitism. I'm thinking of, like, the DevoTedandstraightedges of the world where it's, like, undeniable.
Yes.
And so it seems like part of what's going on here, too, is to say, well, since you support some of the same things that they support, aren't you also an anti-Semite?
No.
Right. Which is, like, the worst argument ever. It's the most ridiculous non-argument. Like, you know, I think I told one of them I was arguing with Will Chamberlain online, who I do like, but is very bad on this issue.
Yeah.
But he said something like, you have the same position as like the college, you know, blue hair.
Oh yeah, that's right. You said you're like AOC and Code Pink or something.
Crazy.
That's good. I mean, we should all aspire to be like Code Pink, by the way. They're very admirable and brave and courageous people. But anyway, go on.
Well, yes, I mean, while I might disagree with some of their tactics at times, from a strategic point of view, they're right about the wars objectively, and they've been right about them
Balance.
since the beginning.
Dave is
Unlike,
balanced.
you know, so many of the fair weather
It doesn't
liberals, what I respect
make
about
him
them is they didn't shut up
weak or
for the same
fragile
position
or.
as like the college, you know, blue hair.
Oh yeah, that's right. You said you're like
He's
AOC
logical.
and
Dave
Code
is
Pink or
logical,
something.
bro.
That's good. I mean,
He's logical,
we should all
bro.
aspire
More
to be
people
like Code
need
Pink, by the
to
way.
be
They're
logical.
Very admirable and brave and courageous people. But anyway, go on.
Well, yes, I mean, while I might
Impartial
disagree with
is
some of their
logical.
tactics,
Balanced
from a
is
strategic
logical.
point of view,
More
they're
people
right about
need
the wars
to be
objectively, and they've been right
impartial
about them
and
since the beginning.
balanced.
And unlike, you know, so many of the fair weather liberals, what I respect about them is they didn't point of view, they're right about the wars objectively, and they've been right about them since the beginning. And unlike, you know, so many of the fair weather liberals, what I respect about them is they didn't shut up during Obama. We're one of the few, like, leftist groups out there that was just as good under him as they were under George W. Bush. But what is it? First of all, AOC is not nearly as good as them or me on the
Correct.
issue. But
Correct.
what does this mean? I said my response to him was, I was like, I know, and you're just like Stalin when it comes to the topic of Hitler. Like, what does that mean? So if I oppose the war in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, I guess I'm on the same side as Saddam Hussein. But
It's
that doesn't
crazy.
mean anything. Like, what point does that prove? And the
Goofy.
question is the policy correct or incorrect? Not who you might agree with.
I know.
So it's all just these. And look, you
Yeah.
know, the thing that's kind of
Certain people.
back in 2003, I guess I'm on the same side as Saddam Hussein. But that doesn't mean
They're
anything.
more
Like, what point does
loyal
that
to
prove?
their tribe than they are to the truth, to integrity, to laudability, to honorability. It is really shameful, bro. Disgraceful.
What point does that
They
prove?
are more loyal to their tribe than they are truly more loyal to their tribe. They are truly more loyal to their tribes than they are to the truth, integrity, laudability, and honorability. It is crazy, bro. Trash.
Mean anything? Like, what point does that prove? And the question is the policy correct or incorrect? Not who you might agree with.
I know.
So it's all just these. And look, you know, the thing that's kind of
But you
sad
know what,
about it.
Dave, I have to say, I think a lot of people operate that way, where they
Yeah.
look at like, oh,
On both
AOC
teams.
thinks this, I have to think that. Oh,
Puppets
Trump thinks this, I
ish,
have to
robots
think that.
ish.
I mean, unfortunately, that's just what negative polarization is.
Sycophancy.
Unfortunately, I think that is how a lot of people
Toady-ish
operate.
stuff.
Yeah, no.
Puppets-ish.
Unfortunately, that's just what negative
Robots-ish.
polarization is. Unfortunately, I think that is how a lot of people operate politically.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think there's
Bonery.
in my opinion, the greatest living American hero and the greatest person ever run for president, Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. I think he is single-handedly a huge factor on why the right wing went so non-interventionist over the last few years. And a lot of it was because he was a Republican from Texas who's a very personally conservative guy, and he got on stage and said, I oppose all of these wars. And right-wingers would listen to him in a way that they just weren't going to listen to Michael Moore. Like, just throw out a fat communist and tell me that's who I got to be, and I got to give up my entire identity in order to oppose these wars. And then here you have a country doctor telling you, like, no, you can keep your identity. And you just can oppose the wars. And so there is powerful social psychology to that, and that's why people use these tactics. But intellectually, it's completely bankrupt. It makes no sense whatsoever. You know, we agree, left-wingers and right-wingers agree on lots of things. That doesn't mean they're the same. And of course, this tactic was, by the way, the same tactic is what was used on Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein when they were challenging the woke orthodoxy.
Yep.
They would always be referred to as alt-right adjacent. Like, as if they had anything to do with the fact that there were white nationalists, you know, in Charlottesville or something like that. Because they're like 1 degree of separation, where some of the people who like them might also listen to their podcast. But again, the game with the people who are calling people like me woke right is to do
Ian Carroll.
thing, to invoke the word.
They label him woke right too because he opposes the wars, the
They were challenging
killings,
woke
the
orthodoxy. They'd always be
occupation.
referred to as
Yeah, bro.
alt-right adjacent. Like as if they had anything to do with the fact that there were white nationalists, you know, in Charlottesville or something like that, because they're like 1 degree of separation, or some of the people who like them might also listen to their podcast. But again, the game with the people who are calling people like me woke right is to do the exact same thing, to invoke the worst, you know, of the racialist Jew haters online, and then say that also represents Tucker Carlson or
Candace,
Carl Cooper,
Anomaly.
or me, or whoever. And it's just not true. I mean, there is, you know,
Jake,
there certainly are
Anna.
people who are Jew haters who oppose this war. Nationalist Jew haters online, and then say that also represents Tucker Carlson or Daryl Cooper or me or whoever. I mean, it's just not true. I mean, there is, you know, there certainly are people who are Jew haters who oppose this war. Israel and the neocons are giving them a lot to work with. They're handing them talking points every single day.
warmongers.
Basically help their recruitment efforts.
The
But
partialists.
there's a huge, and I believe much bigger, percentage of the American people who just oppose this war because it's
The
awful,
occupation,
and it's not
the-
in our national interest to fund and arm the thing,
Yeah.
and don't have any animosity towards Jews.
Jews.
So they know. Look, it's like it's always the same. It was the same when I debated Douglas Murray. They know they can't win the argument. It's indefensible.
Sam
on
Harris.
every level. And so they always have to go to these.
It's the radical pro-Israel dudes
Fund and arm
too.
the thing,
Yeah.
and don't have any animosity toward Jews. And so they know, look, it's like, it's always the same. It was the same when I debated Douglas Murray. They know they can't win the argument because it's indefensible on
Yep.
every level. And so they always have to go to these tactics, but
Yeah.
the
Yep.
right one is particularly ridiculous.
They go to
To
sophistry,
say
you know,
Yeah, they
Much
resort
bigger, percentage
to
of the
Puro-ish,
American people
to
who just oppose this war because it's awful. And
you
it's
never
not
went
in our
to these
national
countries,
interest
so
to
you
fund and arm
can't
the thing.
say
They don't have
anything.
any animosity toward Jews, and so they
Stupid.
Look, it's like it's always the same. It was the same when I debated Douglas Murray. They know they can't win the argument because it's indefensible on every level, and so they always have to go to these tactics. But
Yeah,
the
they
woke
go
right
to-
one is particularly ridiculous.
they go to sophistry, you know, they go to like, you know, appeal to X, oh, you're not an authority, you couldn't know. I mean, this has been a very effective tactic, I think, for years on Israel-Palestine of like, it's complicated, you just don't understand. And because the images have been so horrific and so constant and so undeniable, I think it has, if you look at the polling of American people, I think it has finally broken through. Like, no, I am allowed to oppose the bombing of babies with my tax dollars. And I don't need to know 100 years of history to know that that's something that's wrong and that I oppose and do not want to be any part of. Hey, if you like that
They
video,
both cooked. It is what it is, yo. Love or hate these people, Crystal Ball, Dave, love or hate these characters. They both cooked. They both made sense. It is what it is. Let's get into this video.
Joining us now is the host
Emily Ryan Grimm with 2 M's.
of the Latitude Adjustment podcast, Eric Maddox from California. He's joining us from the West.
Ryan is
Eric,
a leftist.
thank you so much
She's
for
a
being here.
rightist.
So you were in a recently.
They have a show named Counterpoints under Breaking Points.
And dragged away by
They're affiliated with Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty, the main hosts of the channel, of the show. Run it back.
From California. He's joining us from the West. Eric, thank you so much for being here. So you were recently in the old city of Hebron when a clip of you being detained and dragged away by the Israeli forces
Wow.
went viral around the internet for people who were just listening. To the
Just for
podcast,
filming?
we're
Yeah.
rolling this here. Then can you tell us what you were producing, first of all, when they came upon you, and what preceded this moment, and then we'll get into what happened afterwards.
So in brief, Hebron, or Korea in Arabic, or Korea in Arabic, is kind of the entire.
Afterwards.
So in brief, Hebron, or Korea in Arabic, or Korea in Arabic, is kind of the entire occupation of the West Bank, condensed down to minutes. Where in some cases in the West Bank, trying to travel from city to city, would be faced with checkpoints and occasional incursions by the IDF and police. In
Israel
the city of
Defense
Hebron, it can be
Forces.
the streets, just trying to cross what we force suppression checkpoints, show ID, and subject to automatic harassment from settlers who really want to pop the Palestinian shopkeepers and homes, and also homes, stealing their homes, etc., and pushing them out of the city. So every Saturday, for some time now, there is a march by the settlers through the old city of Hebron, which is still, a place where Palestinians live and do their business. And it is overseen by, protected by the Israeli forces, the police, and to some extent, I would imagine the IDF as well. And that's what I was there to document, along with several Palestinian journalists, this past Saturday, 4 days ago. And so what happened is the Israeli forces will show up preceding the arrival of the settlers, who are given like this really bizarre, entitled tour that forces Palestinian shopkeepers to shut down their business, while the Israeli police are pointing their rifles at children, at the elderly, at
scary.
the infirm.
Scary, bro.
I mean, this isn't just my opinion.
Nuts, crazy, insane.
We're given like this really bizarre, entitled tour that forces Palestinian shopkeepers to shut down their business, while the Israeli police are pointing.
Unbelievable, bro. Inconceivable.
The infirm. I mean, this isn't just my opinion.
The infirm meaning the sick, the diseased.
The infirm. I mean, this isn't just my opinion. This is something I've seen. I documented all of these things as they were happening. And
this is craziness, yo. This is craziness.
And at that point, I was complying with all the orders of the Israeli police. At no point, I should be clear, at no point were they told to put away my camera, or to stop filming, or to hand over my camera. At no point before I was tackled and insane. And
it's nuts. Abusive. If he never transgressed or violated, it is really crazy. It is really crazy, bro. It is really abusive that the people did this to him, bro. Everybody should be in opposition to this BS. If this did happen, take place, befall this dude.
Closure shops, kicking their stuff around, and otherwise making their lives hell. And at a certain point, I could see this.
Terrible, bro.
We were complying, like backpedaling, and as we're backpedaling, they're screaming at the shopkeepers and various people, Palestinians in the street, to abandon where they are, to get inside, close their shops, kicking their stuff around, and otherwise making their lives hell. And at a certain point, I could see this.
Evil, bro.
I just yelled out.
Scummy.
I've been seeing. My first time in Palestine was 16 years ago.
Disgraceful, bro.
I've had colleagues, journalists, get inside.
Unlaudable.
Kicking their stuff around, but otherwise making their lives hell. And at a certain point, when I could see the settlers in the background, I just yelled out. I've been seeing. My first time in Palestine was 16 years ago. I've had colleagues, journalistic colleagues that I have worked with, killed in Gaza, and we're now facing close to 200.
Rest in peace, bro. Condolences to your people, bro. I mean, to you and the people who knew them, who are the people who are still living, who knew them too.
This is personal to me as well as something.
Sending y'all good energy, bro. Sending y'all good energy for sure.
Associated media personnel who've been assassinated. I've been seeing. My first time in politics 16 years ago, okay? I've had colleagues, journalistic colleagues that I have worked with, killed in Gaza, and we're now facing close to 200 journalists and associated media personnel who've been assassinated in Gaza since October 7th. And also the routine harassment, detention, and torture of Palestinian journalists in the West Bank. So this is perfect, like hell. And at a certain point, when I could see the sunrise in the background, I just yelled out, I've seen
devilish,
my
demonic.
16 years ago, okay? I've had colleagues, journalistic colleagues that I have worked with, killed in Gaza, and we're now facing close to 200 journalists and associated media personnel who've been assassinated in Gaza since October 7th. And also the routine harassment, detention, and torture of Palestinian journalists in the West Bank. So this is personal to me, as well as something that I think should be, a concern to all people and journalists, especially around the world. And so when I saw this as something at a certain point, it snapped me just like it snapped for university students over the past 19 months, and saying the same things that I was saying in this moment, which is free Palestine. I'm an American. I'm sure some of you who are in this settlement tour are probably American and European citizens as well. And I'm tired of paying for this with my tax dollars. This is ridiculous. And at a certain point, the Israelis started filming me, the police. And I just said, look, enough is enough. You feel brave, flagging women and children and the infirm with your weapons. And this is when they charged me. Runs for my camera, they wound up on the ground, I wound up on the ground, and then I was immediately just beaten, handcuffed.
Glad he's still living, bro. Word. Glad he is still here to tell the story, bro. Word.
Beaten, handcuffed. For me, the police.
Scary. Scary. Really, really scary, bro.
Enough is enough. You feel brave? Flagging women and children and the infirm with your weapons? And this is when they charged me, runs for my camera, they wound up on the ground, I wound up on the ground, and then I was immediately just beaten, handcuffed. And I can tell you what happened after what you saw in that footage, because that's the soft part. Everything after that was the actual, putting, beating, torture, all that stuff.
Right. So, and as you're leaving, there's somebody else filming you, and they said, who are you? You say, you're back from California. So these police who are dragging you out of there, they know you're a Californian. So
we're in the just right, but I would assume they know what California is.
Right. Yes, I mean, definitely they know what California is. The whole world knows what California is. And this is not to say that because you're from California, you should not be beaten and tortured and illegally detained. Nobody should be. However, it's to acknowledge the geopolitics of the situation. So they take you away. Where do they take you, and what happens next?
I do underscore your point, because that's the reason I'm coming on this show and any other media I do. This isn't about me, an American, getting roughed up. And there's more than roughed up. I mean, I don't want to downplay it either. I was tortured for 4 hours. And what was done to me doesn't even begin to come close to what is done to my Palestinian colleagues in the West Bank, or those who have been assassinated, continue to be persecuted, targeted, and their families as well.
He's being humble, bro.
So I want to make that very clear. Anything that was done to me, multiply
so
that
big
by
ups to
many
the bro.
factors, up to and including death to my Palestinian colleagues. So that's why I'm on the show. That's what I want to call attention to. And also this absolute cowardice and abdication of all moral responsibility and professional credibility.
Yeah.
So I want to make that very clear. For those who have been assassinated,
illegally displaced, dispossessed, deprived of food, water, different things.
Anything that was done to me, multiply that by many, many factors, up to and including death to my Palestinian colleagues. So that's why I'm on this show. That's what I want to call attention to. And also this absolute cowardice and abdication of all moral responsibility and professional credibility by much of Western English language media, who should be, in my opinion, resigning en masse in protest of the absolutely abysmal coverage and facilitation of this genocide that's been going on for 19 months.
And then I think that's valuable context and caveat on that. But as you said, it also does not justify violence against, even for only 4 hours. So what did happen to you?
So after I was out of, first of all, the people who told me, I didn't know them. They were just random people who happened to be standing there. One of them you can hear on camera asking, "Who are you?" And I don't know where. I mean, if I look dazed, it's because I had my head pounded into the cobblestone streets where like several men with assault rifles took shots at me. And they escorted me. What was escorted? To a gated area at the head of the old city. Out of view of the cameras, and that's when they started beating the hell out of me, punching me in the back of the head, throwing me on the ground, and then demanding that I get up, handcuffed, and I needed to move. And then they got me to the top of this hill next to an armored car, and they didn't seem to be clear on what they wanted either, because some of them were telling me to get in the vehicle, some of them were telling me to get out. Then they hooded me, they blocked it over my head, told me to get on my knees. I refused. I figured they were going to do something terrible. I'd rather not be on my knees, and they did it. And so at that point, they threw me on the ground and started beating me more. They ran in my face for some reasons that might be obvious, but they started going through my things, confiscating my wallet, my passports, and then continued to beat me, put me in the military or the police vehicle, continued to beat me in the vehicle on the way to the police station. And at this point, they had my camera, which is my phone, and they were twisting my arm to the point of feeling they were going to break it. And demanding that I unlock my phone, with like the biometric scan fingerprint thing. And I refused, and they were trying to open my hand and force me to use my fingerprint to open it, and I just clenched my fist as hard as I possibly could, and somehow managed to avoid that. I'm sure had it been Palestinian, they would have been brutal enough to where they might have broken me, But so they eventually got me to the police station. The police were there. They saw what was happening, didn't do anything to stop it. I spent about 4 hours in the police station. At some points, having like, how to avoid that. I'm sure had it been Palestinian, they would have been brutal enough to where they might have broken me, But so they eventually got me to the police station. The police were there. They saw what was happening, didn't do anything to stop it. I spent about 4 hours in the police station. At some points, having my handcuffs taken off and taken in to do like a preliminary discussion with the police officer and told me if I asked if I had a lawyer. I said no, so then they put me in touch with the Palestinian lawyer from Haifa. She told me that I went to be interrogated, that I had the right not to say anything, but it might be in my interest to actually tell them at least what had happened. Then I was again cuffed. They let me get some water, but before I could drink from the water bottle, they re-handcuffed me, beat me some more. And then uncuffed me, took me back and did the interrogation. And at that point, the police officer started asking me, what is your opinion of October 7th? Are you affiliated with any anti-Israel groups? Are you taking money from them? And I said, I don't see how these questions are in any way relevant. Are you going to ask me about all the bruises that are all over my body? And he said, no. And I told him, he said, why are you in Israel? And I said, I'm not in Israel. I mean, I was with it for some period of time, so unless you're taking me out of Hebron, I'm not in Israel. And he said, yes, you are. And then he tried to ask me where I had been staying and who I was affiliated locally. I refused to answer those questions because I didn't want other people to be put in harm's way. And I also told him I didn't recognize that he had any legitimacy as a law enforcement officer because he had no interest in conducting an actual investigation. And then I was looked. I mean, like I said, I was fingerprinted. They did the full biometric scan on the face. They took on mug shots. And I mean, it just went back and forth between these procedural things that odd. I mean, it was stressful. Weird, like, horrible position of like kind of benign procedural stuff with just beating the hell out of me, and just this casual attitude toward just the sadistic treatment. I could hear another Palestinian guy around the corner from me being, I imagine, beaten.
Craziness, bro.
I mean, like I said, I was fingerprinted. They did the full biometric scan on the face. They took on mug shots. And I mean, it just went back and forth between these procedural things that odd. I mean, there was this weird, like, juxtaposition of, like, kind of benign procedural stuff with just beating the hell out of me, and just this really casual attitude toward just the sadistic treatment. I could hear another Palestinian guy around the corner from me being, I imagine beaten severely because he was screaming his head off. I couldn't see him, so
Wow.
he went to Palestine. Got beaten some more.
Wow.
And then just mockery, like aiming cameras in my face and presumably taking pictures for Instagram. And I just said, right into the camera, I said, look, whenever this is translated into Hebrew, I want you all to know I'm surrounded by 6 heavily armed men while I'm handcuffed, and I was taking him because I was taking pictures. You guys are not on the right side of history, etc.
When they're hitting you, he said they mostly avoided your face. Like where would they hit you? What would they hit you with? How many?
Back of the head. Occasionally they would like try to sit next to me or on top of me, just to try and intimidate me. And so if I would move away, or if when they were taking my picture, I would stand up and tell them to stop, and they would hit me or use pressure points like on the inside of my neck. A lot of this was like what I call stress positions, where they would take my head and force it down so hard that it felt like the back of my neck was going to break. Putting their knees on their elbows on top of my head, but like against my hairline, so that you couldn't see the bruise. A lot of the beating was like on the hairlines, and the bruises aren't as easy to see. I mean, I do have bruises on my body. I mean, you can see like a little bit on my wrists here, etc. Yeah. But most of it was done in a way that seemed like it was left intended not to leave marks. Yeah. And again, I'm sure if had I been Palestinian, the treatment would have been far more
Worse.
What if anything
It's what's
have you
have
heard
been
since
crazier, bro. Thank goodness the treatment wasn't worse.
But most of it was done in a way that seemed like it was left intended not to leave marks. And again, I'm sure if had I been Palestinian, the treatment would have been far more severe.
Worse.
What, if anything, have you heard since being released from the Israeli government? What's just a general reaction since the video has gone viral? What has the response been like?
So, the charges weren't clear at all. I was told something along the lines of obstructing of the police action. You can see from the video that I provided you guys, like the last thing, thankfully that actually was recorded. They're charging me. And at no point they told me to stop filming, right? So the idea that was
makes no sense.
It's preposterous. It's not that that even justified what they had done to me. The response has been from the last
released from the Israeli government. What's just a general
the abuse of power is crazy, bro. What they did to this dude was gratuitous, bro. Unwarranted. Unjustifiable.
They're charging me. At no point they told me to stop filming, right? So the idea that was in any way interfering is preposterous. It's not that that would even justify what they had done to me. The response has been from, and I do need to be careful, I think, in some ways, but what I understand at this point is I have not been formally charged with anything. I'm just under suspicion of what, I have no idea. And I've been banned from the city of Tidron for 15 days from last Saturday, which honestly seems pretty light. Some people, some good friends of mine, I believe swung into action very swiftly, and I understand that Congress people and other journalists, etc., were contacted. I don't know. I haven't even had a chance to catch up with it. Things dealing with this all happened 4 days ago. So I'm still just kind of recovering. And then on the internet, I mean, that all seems to go viral in about a day. And I mean, people reaching out to me privately, like through social media, it's just been amazing. Like,
Dope.
I don't think I've had one single, and like I can't even keep up with all the messages. It's all been just supportive. And that's been
great.
Validating. And also just, it's done a lot to help me kind of process that experience. And it's also just, that experience is humbling also just in like, I don't know that I could have handled 2 days of that. And there's people who've been locked up for months, years, and treated worse than me the entire time. Those are the people that are still alive. Like,
strong, bro. The people who endure this, bro.
And I just had enough. And everybody has their point where they just feel like, look, like, silence is no longer an option. And like, what everybody has been saying from university campuses, up, and everybody has their point where they just feel like, look, like, I'm not a
The people
particularly great
meant
person.
to say the
I just
people who
had,
endure
I just had enough. And everybody
this
has their point where
and
they just
don't
feel
give
like,
up
look, like,
are strong.
silence, and silence. That experience is humbling also. It's in like, I don't know that I could have handled 2 days of that. And there's people that have been locked up for months, years, and treated worse than me the entire time. Those are the people that have been, that are still alive. Like, I am not a particularly great person. I just had enough. And everybody has their point where they just feel like, look, like, silence, and silence is no longer an option.
Breaking points.
What everybody has been saying.
Bars. That is a bar. Everybody has their breaking point.
Everybody has their point where they just feel like, look, like,
even the strongest people,
silence, and
the
silence
toughest
is no longer an
people.
option. And like, what everybody has been saying.
You can only take so much.
Around the world for the last 19
You can only take so much before you break. You can only take so much before you break.
Silence is no longer an option, and like what everybody has been saying from university campuses all around the world for the last 19 months. I stand in solidarity with them. I stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, and I also feel like the people who are perpetrating these crimes, these feel like there's no place where they can be where they will not be exposed to shame for their behavior. An option, and like what everybody has been saying from university campuses all around the world for the last 19 months. I stand in solidarity with them. I stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, and I also feel like the people who are perpetrating these crimes, they feel like there is no place where they can be where they will not be exposed to shame for their behavior. You know, including
denounced.
Did any of the people,
condemned,
the officers that you interacted with throughout the entire time, express any concern or reservations that they might be screwing up by doing this to an American?
Not in the slightest.
Crazy.
Not in the
No shame, no guilt.
American?
Not in the slightest.
No penitence, no contrition.
Express any concern or reservations that they might be screwing up by doing this to an American?
Not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. I mean, who knows what's going on in their head and whether or not that they pull their punches about, but I mean, they knew where I was the slightest. I mean, who knows what's going on in their head and whether or not that they pull their punches about, but I mean, the slightest. I mean, who knows what's going on in their head and whether or not that they pull their punches about, but I mean, they knew where I was from. I did speak to a few in English. And there were IDF soldiers who came. I became like this point of curiosity where more and more of them kept coming, like asking me, like, what are you doing here? They were asking, like, how do you feel about Eurovision? These bizarre questions, right?
Oh yeah, so they got like snubbed from Eurovision or something.
This is like right before I think those vote. It was just so freaking surreal. Sorry, on so many levels. And while this is happening, and they were also just, I kept talking because of the adrenaline and being selling them this. Like, can somebody translate the word coward for me, please? Tell them all, and I'm like, counting. Some of them spoke Arabic, like they're Arabic speaking Israelis, I'm assuming. And one said his family was from Yemen originally. And so I just counted off in Arabic, you know, what Spy, like soldiers. There's 6 soldiers, 1 journalist, Fahed Sahafi. Like, with my hand behind my back. Do you really feel brave? This is something that you're going to be proud of showing on Instagram, wherever you're planning on posting this? So, no, zero.
Sucky, cruddy, Mikey.
He kept repeating things that I can't repeat every time I'm telling him, look, like, are you embarrassed? If you would close the door periodically and let them rough me up more, then I would tell him, look, you realize what's happening when you shut the door and you just ignore me. No, no concern at all.
Tell people where they can go to
Terrible.
find your work.
Sure.
Big ups to this
on my
dude,
podcast, which I'm going to be relaunching.
Eric Maddox.
At the latitudeadjustmentpod.com, or just find Latitude Adjustment Podcast at Spotify, Apple. or
He's courageous, bro.
And also, you can find me on social media on Instagram at MadMaddox. My name is Eric Maddox.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us. And
Words.
wish you
Gratitude.
safe travels back to the United
Facts.
States whenever you decide to
Words.
come home.
Hey, if you like.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Bro. Yo, what is the world coming to, bro? Yeah. Things like what befell this dude Maddox make me want to become a misanthrope, bro. Things like what befell Maddox really make me want to become a misanthrope. But this bloke will never become a misanthrope because there are good people in the world. There are truly virtuous people and truly moral people in the world. So this bloke won't ever become a misanthrope, but sometimes a bloke wants to become a misanthrope because of things like this, bro. Torturing people for no good reason, bro. If bro. If you believe they are anti-Jew or pro-Hamas, you can just unprovokedly physically abuse them or whatever, bro. Nah, bro. Nah. Yeah, anybody who is for this or agrees with this, bro. Anybody who agrees with this BS, anybody who agrees with this BS is devoid of rectitude. It is what it is, man. It is what it is, man. Peace.